Good afternoon, folks, and thanks for everyone who's tuned in today for this first session of one of four sessions we're going to do about grants this month. This first one is getting to know grants. Every Thursday this month at noon, we're going to be covering a different topic related to grants. And this first session is just a very, kind of a 101 sort of overview of grants. Kind of like if you like sat next to us on a bus and asked us what we do, this is kind of like what we would tell you. So this is going to be just kind of quick and breezy. And as we go through this series and move into these next sessions, we'll kind of get into a little more detail about some things related to grants. So Purpose Possible has been, we work with firms of just a wide range of sizes. So large, well-established firms with, multi-million-dollar budgets to start up very small nonprofits with, a shoestring budget and small staff. So, but one constant is that we work with a lot of folks who are just new to grants or overwhelmed by grants or just feel like they're not getting everything they could out of grants, that there's more out there. So this whole series is kind of inspired by those situations and those conversations that we've had. So, what we're hoping here is that we can give folks who are new to grants or folks who are familiar with grants some tips, some information and tips that we think will be useful. Before you start a journey with a firm, or if you're just kind of going at it yourself. So we can move on to introductions. My name's Andrew Jones. I've been with Purpose Possible for 2 years now, but I've been grant writing for well over a decade, as indicated by my loss of hair. So I've worked in mostly as a consultant, but I've also done some in-house work with the social services agency and a community college. But have worked on just all kinds of projects in my career. A lot of education, as you would expect, and adult and youth education, and then worked with clients of all different sizes. Everything from nonprofit news to getting innocent people out of prison. So just a wide range of things. So Marcy, do you want to?
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marcy Breffel, and I also have been with Purpose Possible a little over 2 years now. My background is in museums and historic preservation, and I have primarily work with clients who are in the arts and culture sector in Metro Atlanta. So clients include the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, Cobb Landmarks, and Synchronicity Theater, among many others. But my work is primarily in grants writing and reporting. But along the way, I've developed pipelines for different clients and worked with stewardship. So very excited to be talking to you all today. And I'll toss it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Marcy. Hey, y'all. I'm Hannah Ranson. I've been with Purpose Possible a little over 2 years now, and I've worked on several clients researching grant pipelines, grants management, and development funding. So my background is actually in public health. So I primarily work with clients in the food or health space, and a few past and current clients include Georgians for a Healthy Future, Emory Global Health Institute, and community farmers markets. And I'll pass it over to you, Andrew.
All right. We'll, Audie, if you could bring up the slides. Okay, thank you. So if you could advance to, I think, the third slide, fourth. Okay, so we're just going to dive right into the most common types of grants. So the three that we see kind of the most, and the three that I think most of us have worked on the most, are general operating grants, which will cover a wide range of expenses. So, salaries, your office expenses, just whatever, the typical things that you need to operate your nonprofit. And these are, they vary widely in size, like most of the grants that we'll talk about. But these are always these are these are a great one to find if you can, because they really can support sort of all aspects of your organization. And then project or programming grants are also very common. Hannah, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, one thing I'll add, Andrew, is some grant funders will be more strict with the differentiation between project and program when selecting the type of funding you're applying for. So it's really helpful to know the difference between the two when you run into this. And so I'll just give you a brief definition for both. A project grant represents a single focused effort with defined outputs. So you can think of this as a one-time concentrated endeavor with clear objectives and measurable results. So, for example, this could be a grant to develop a new community outreach effort or to create a specific educational resource. Whereas, on the other hand, a program grant is typically a collection of projects with long-term outcomes. Programs are more comprehensive and ongoing, encompassing multiple projects that collectively contribute to broader long-term goals. So, for instance, this could be a youth development program that might include various projects like after-school tutoring, summer camps, and mentoring activities, all working together to achieve sustained improvements in youth education and well-being.
Great, thanks. That's actually something that I've run into a lot with grants, where you have to go through and correct the nomenclature. So it's really something to keep in mind. And then capacity building is another common type of grant. And sometimes these will pay for hiring new folks, and sometimes they won't. Marcy, I think you had some things to share.
Yes. So think of capacity building grants as ways to level up your organization. So examples of these type of applications might be for a website overhaul or completely updating your evaluations process across the board. Like Andrew said, maybe adding support staff or ensuring pay equity among your different staff members, maybe if you have teaching artists and those that you work with.
And these can be very helpful if you're kind of moving past the startup phase as in a project or program, or as an organization. So these are always great to look out for. Next slide, please. Some additional types of grants that are a little bit less common. So you've got research grants, which if you work at in a sponsored programs department at a university, you're going to see a lot of research grants. Endowment grants, that would also be kind of a larger, typically for larger organizations that have an endowment. In-kind grants, we do see a good number of those where a funder will just provide goods or just non-cash or staff, staff time to support your organization. And then capital grants are, they're definitely much needed, and they'll help you, rehab a building or purchase a large piece of equipment, or sometimes even, especially if you're talking about federal grants, they can help you actually build, construct new facilities. And then there's matching grants too, which for some organizations can be a little difficult, because you'll have to, you have to come up with $25,000 for an organization to match the $25,000, something like that. So, but these are all types that you may see. Next slide. An important sort of differentiation to think about with grants is unrestricted funding versus restricted funding. So unrestricted funding, especially if you were to find this for your general operations, is great, because you can essentially do not whatever you want to with the funds, but it really gives you a lot of there's a lot of wiggle room for how you can spend the funds, and kind of you determine, a lot can change as you're going through a budget year. So it can help you to kind of be a little more flexible, a little more agile with your funds. Whereas restricted funding is, purely allocated to, one kind of project or program. There's typically, as you see here, stricter reporting requirements, typically because it's related to, a single project or program. But if you can find we always like to look for unrestricted funding for folks, and it's obviously, kind of what folks want. But you'll often see, especially if you're looking for grants for a particular project, that it will definitely, be restricted. Next slide. So, as you kind of drill down into grants, there's obviously these different types of what they'll fund, and then of course there's a variety of sources for grants. So these are almost in like an order of kind of like difficulty level, if you want to think about that, although as you'll see, it all varies a lot. So federal grants are typically for large projects, multi-year projects, and you'll see grants into the hundreds of thousands, into the millions of dollars, and these are complex. And I mean, you can spend 60 days on a federal grant to get it right. So they're time-consuming applications, and then something to keep in mind is just very intensive. They have very intensive reporting requirements. So these are, you would think about one of these if you have staff capacity to manage the grant, to report on the grant, and also, if it was, if like you want to like build a garden in the neighborhood, like you're not going to pursue a federal grant for that. So and then state grants are kind of the same, very similar, but the main difference would be that they're limited to the state that you're in. So again, time-consuming applications, not usually not as bad as federal, but they can still be pretty intensive. And then the same with the reporting requirements. And then foundation grants, I mean, these vary. There's just a huge range in terms of the size of awards, what organizations are interested in funding. You have ones that are interested in STEM, and then ones that are interested in, I've seen ones where they want to build, like basketball courts and things. So it's kind of all over the place. And then you'll also see geographic variables, like you'll have an organization in Colorado that only funds organizations in Colorado. So it's really important that you do your research. A grant can seem, or a foundation can seem like a great fit and very exciting, and then you see that it only funds one neighborhood or something in your city. So you need to like the IRS 990 forms can be very helpful to kind of see what they've funded in the past, and doing a deep dive on their website can really help too. So Sartain Lanier is a family foundation in Georgia. So it's a smaller organization. These range from that sort of organization all the way to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I think has more money than some countries. So and they make enormous awards. So there's just a lot with foundation grants. I mean, they're a great source of funding, but there's a lot of variables to think about. And then corporate grants, these are often dependent on who you know. So like if you have a board member that has a friend at at the foundation or with the corporation, that's often very important. And you'll even see that question in grants in the application sometimes, like who suggested that you apply, that sort of thing. And these are also often limited to like the communities around the company headquarters and where they have facilities and that kind of thing. And something we're seeing a lot more of is wanting to have volunteer opportunities for employees. So those can also be large, hundreds of thousands of dollars, grants, and they can be fairly consistent too, but those relationships are very important. And then just quickly, the community and local grants, these are typically like we put in the example of the Metropolitan Atlanta Arts Fund. and City of Marietta. So these are, typically hyper local kind of projects, and you'll see things like micro and mini grants a lot of times, or like emergency need sort of grants where a nonprofit has just some particular need pops up, or there's a population that needs assistance. So these are, sometimes they're one-off kind of projects, but you will see that sometimes they can be a source of consistent funding because, maybe you're the only organization in town that does whatever it is that they're looking to fund. So it can be a consistent source of funding, but as we'll discuss here in a little bit, don't get complacent with these kinds of grants or any kind of grant. Next slide. Marcy, I'll kick it over to you.
All right. So types of proposals that you may see when you are looking at different funders. First one is going to be an LOI. This you may have seen this as a letter of intent, letter of inquiry, letter of interest. These are typically 1 to 3 page documents that you will send to a funder to introduce your organization and mission and talk about the project or program or general operating that you want to get funded by this funder. Many foundations are asking for an LOI because this helps them weed out potential organizations that maybe don't align with the offered grant. So your LOI will typically include that introduction to your organization mission. So the who will be doing this work, a statement of need, why are you doing it? Project activities is the what and the how. Thinking about your outcomes, and outputs, and then also maybe a brief budget or just how much money you will need to accomplish this particular project that you are requesting funding. So an LOI, it's only 1 to 3 pages. So you would think, hey, this is easy. It's sometimes so tough to edit yourself down because this is your chance to put your best foot forward with a funder, and you want to share all the good things that your organization does and all the potential impact that this project or program may be able to accomplish. So make sure that you are being very careful in the wording that you're using so that you can make the biggest impact with this limited, page number. If you are chosen some funders will just don't do an LOI process, they'll just go straight into an application. But oftentimes, if your LOI is approved, you'll be invited to submit a full application. We are going to dive in deeper into applications and language in our 3rd grant series, or on the August 22nd. But big picture is that an effective grant proposal is going to do a couple different things. The first thing, it's going to tell a story. You want to hook the reader and tell them what the work that you're doing matters and what impact you could have. You're going to want to prove your credentials. You want to show the funder why you are the only organization that is going to solve the problem that you've put forth. You're going to explain the relevance. Why should the funder care about this work? You want to demonstrate feasibility. So does your organization have the ability to complete the outlined work and project activities on time and within the budget you've submitted? You also want to build ties with grant makers. Think of these potential funders as partners in this work. How does what you're requesting align with their mission? And then also you want to make sure your application understands audience and impact. I know it's sometimes very hard when you're doing kind of a general operating application, but you want to be as clear as possible of who your target audience is for this work and what your outcomes are going to be. One thing that we haven't included on here is an eligibility quiz. Many funders are moving towards these eligibility quizzes that you can find on their website, and think of this as almost like a pre-LOI. It might be a couple of questions that the funder will put forth to make sure that you truly are a good fit for their organization. So The eligibility quiz, it may be a couple of questions, but it'll eliminate organizations that are not the right fit right away. So on here, we've included a QR code to some really good sample grant documents and templates that are offered by the foundation directory. So if you are looking for like, what's a good template? This is a great place to start by scanning this QR code. And we will move on to our next section, which is about grant myths. So we are, and if you have any comments, please feel free to add them into the chat. We are monitoring these. So as Andrew, Hannah, and I were coming together to organize this grant series, this presentation, we were thinking about what are the common things that we hear from clients or from other organizations that we know they're not true. So we want to try to correct some of these myths right now. So if we can go to the next slide. So one of the first myths that we hear a lot is that grants are free money. This is false. It takes time, resources, staff members, or personnel to identify, write, and manage grants. Especially if you are going after some of these bigger federal grants, those are going to require a lot of time and preparation. So grants are never free money. Next slide, please. All right, eligibility means fundability. So just because, this is again false, so just because your organization is eligible for a particular grant does not mean that you will get funded for it. Grant makers often have very strict requirements on who, what, where, when they'll fund. And even if you meet all of these requirements, there's no guarantee that you'll receive funding. But by going through some of the steps that we're going to outline in this grant series, we hope to make you a more attractive organization for a funder. It's the next one. No means never. So in this case, again, we want to think of grant makers as potential partners in the work. So don't be discouraged if your proposal is denied. So just because your proposal was rejected does not mean that your project is unfundable or that the grant maker who declined your proposal won't fund you in the future. We know that foundations, different organizations might update their pillars of funding every couple of years. So you can disqualify that organization now, but you can always return to them in the future if there's better alignment in the future. So an example of a recent Purpose Possible client success story. So a Purpose Possible client recently received $400,000 over 3 years in general operating funding from a major Atlanta foundation. When this organization first met with this funder, they were denied funding, but they took feedback from that funder and continued to reach out with updates and annual reports over the years. And we now see those results with this very big gift. So just know that persistence and relationship building can pay off. I will say one caveat: if a foundation reaches out to you and says, hey, you're not in alignment, please don't apply again, then probably don't apply again. The next one, please. All right, so grants are a stable source of funding. This is false. Grants are limited in duration and funding focus, and they are, require a lot of time and effort, and they are subject to the whims of a funder. If you are awarded a grant, maybe a couple years in a row, a funder will often require grantees to take a break or cycle off before applying again. So do not structure your potential projects with the idea that just because you got funding once, that you will continue to get it year after year. I think, Hannah, you've got something to speak to on this.
Yeah, and honestly, Marcy, it's really just reiterating a lot of what you're saying. But one thing we all really push for is making sure you don't have all your eggs in one basket. So make sure you're looking at the larger picture with various types of funding sources and funders. You don't want to rely too heavily on a few large grants that you've been awarded year over year, because at any given point, a funder could change funding priorities, spend down their money, or for whatever reason decide they no longer want to fund your initiatives. So another thing you might see, as you just said, Marcy, is that funders may allow grant renewal, but limit it to only 2 or 3 years. So this type of grant cycling could ultimately leave a large gap in your budget. So you just want to be mindful of all the grants you have in your pipeline and the various amounts you could have coming in.
All right, thank you, Hannah. The next one is that funders don't read grant reports. Grant makers are your partners in this work, so you want to check in with them as much as you can. So you can check in via email, send them emails, or reach out when you run into problems that could potentially impact your grant, and make sure you ensure that all reports are completed and completed on time. So it's very important that, and we'll talk about this in our 4th webinar, which is on the 29th. We'll talk about this, about ways to do good stewardship with your funders. So I've, in the past, with my with the organizations that I've worked with, maybe we got a testimonial from someone who participated in a program. We'll just send that over to the funder and say, hey, just a quick note, look what great work we're doing. Look at the impact your gift has had. And it's just, again, think of these grant makers as your partners in this work. Next one. All right, and our final myth is that grant money can be used for any purpose. Andrew went over this earlier, but there is, donors can restrict funding. So you want to make sure that you fully understand, if you are awarded a grant, what exactly that money can be used for. Again, general operating is the best type of money. It's the most flexible type of money. But if your donor has laid out a requirement saying this money can only be used for X, Y, and Z, you want to make sure that you are staying true to that request. Because failing to follow the rules, it can result in a loss of funding. It can result in reputational damage. We know, especially in Atlanta, that a lot of foundations talk to one another. So if you get a bad reputation with one foundation, other potential funders may hear about it. And it can even result in legal ramifications, which nobody has time for. So make sure that you are paying attention to your grant agreements and following the parameters set forth in that agreement. All right, and I'm going to toss it over to Hannah to share some really great templates with you.
Thanks, Marcy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the grants packing list. Think of this as your toolkit for a successful grant seeking journey. This list includes several key components that we'll be diving into, including a grant pipeline, a library of supporting documents, and your organizational boilerplate. You can go to the next slide. Next slide. We'll begin by talking through the steps of creating and managing an effective grants pipeline, or rather a systematic approach to identify, apply for, and manage grants effectively and efficiently. Keep track of all your active grants and keep track of prospect information. And Audie, you can go back one slide. Sorry about that. The first step in building an effective grants pipeline is to understand your organization's needs. You'll want to conduct a thorough assessment of your financial situation, including current and future expenses and existing revenue sources. From here, you'll want to identify the income gaps that need to be filled with additional funding. Also, pinpoint the initiatives, projects, or programs that require financial support. Assess their impact, scope, and feasibility before diving into prospect research. A couple of things to keep in mind as you begin this process is to start thinking through a typical calendar year at your organization. What programming timelines may come into play? Are there times of year your organization has less developmental capacity to send out applications and complete reporting requirements? And times that you'll need certain amounts of funding to keep operations running. Finally, you'll research potential funding sources, which our team will discuss in more depth during next week's webinar. And then from here, you'll want to compile a chronological list that gives you an idea of what to expect with approaching grant deadlines. Next slide, please. Now you're ready to create a comprehensive list of potential grant opportunities, including deadlines, funding amounts, and application requirements. So for us, this is our initial research and vetting step of potential prospects. if the prospect is a good fit, we'll carry over a lot of the same information from the prospect sheet to the grants calendar. Again, you'll hear more about this on the next webinar, but as you're researching grant prospects, you'll want to be sure to take note of previous funders, as these will be the ones that are most likely to fund you again in the future. Additionally, you want to make sure you note average grant sizes and reporting requirements, as you want to make sure that the required reporting is proportionate to the potential funding you might receive. And as you're creating this comprehensive list of potential funders, you want to consider the source of the grant, as Andrew went over earlier. So federal versus state versus community funding, the type of grant and grant amounts. So as you begin to understand the level of involvement for each type of grant, you want to create a more balanced calendar with all these factors in mind. Next slide, please. So after revising this comprehensive list, you'll want to reorganize this information chronologically. And additionally, you should organize the list by priority and likelihood of securing funding. This prioritization should be based on the alignment with your organization's strategic priorities, the urgency of funding needs, and the potential impact of your programs on your programs and projects. So on this slide, I have an example calendar that was created in Google Sheets. However, Google Calendar is also a great resource, as well as any other project management software that you can use to send you reminders and keep track of submissions, as well as upcoming deadlines. And one thing to note on the template that we have here is that we like to include this column for funding likelihood, which gives our clients a realistic outlook on whether or not the application should be prioritized based on the various factors that make a funder a good fit. In addition to keeping up with upcoming deadlines, a calendar can also be used as a point of reference, whether it's linking to previous applications to reference as you develop a renewed request. And as you'll see here, if it's not too tiny on your screen, I like to differentiate between previous funders and new prospects by bolding funders who have given previously. The calendar can also store information like the amount of the funder's previous gift sizes and the prior years you've been funded, and other things like grant renewal eligibility, what connections might exist between your organization and the funder, staff, or board, and ultimately it tracks how much has been brought in through grants over this calendar year. Another thing we like to track is funders who have previously denied your request and the reason why, so we know whether or not they have the potential to be cultivated again in the future. Next slide, please. So another area in the pipeline is a tab with organizational information that can serve as a grant cheat sheet. This one tab will save so much time for your organization as you begin to fill in grant applications or LOIs. I typically like to keep this information as the very first tab in my pipeline so it's easy to pull from. It may take a little digging to locate these details if they are not readily available, but it will save you a lot of time in the long run as these prompts frequently show up on every application you start. So this includes things like your organization's employer identification number, the year your organization was founded, links or social media handles, how many board and staff members you have, how many volunteers you have, your mission, your annual budget, and demographics information. Next slide, please. And this slide is just all the information from the previous slide if you want to copy it over and create your own grant cheat sheet. And next slide, please. So in addition to this cheat sheet, you'll also want to go off of a supporting document checklist like we have here. And although all of these documents listed are helpful to have, we have gone through and highlighted the ones that are top priority and a non-negotiable for most applications. These non-negotiable documents are things like your 501c3, staff and board lists with titles, roles, and affiliations, and financial documents, which include audits for the last 3 fiscal years, recent 990s, profit and loss statements for the last 2 fiscal years, current year's budget versus actual, and next year's budget projections. And with that, I will kick it back over to Marcy to go over boilerplates.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Audie, if you can jump back just once, I want to show again this supporting documents library. So like Hannah just said, these are a lot of the supporting documents that you're going to need. We've highlighted the ones that you should prioritize as you are either starting a grants program or maybe need to refresh your grants program. But with all of these templates that Hannah just shared, we at Purpose Possible, we often use the Google suite of, Google Slides, Google Sheets, things like that to manage our projects. But it's important that you pick whatever project management tool works best for you. So that could be I'm trying to think of some Monday, Asana. Do whatever works best for you and your team, but just make sure that you are staying consistent and you are making sure these materials are available to all involved parties. So again, do what works for you. Just make sure you're staying consistent with it. And if we can go to the next one. So one other important document that it's helpful to have as you are getting into this is boilerplate. So this right here is an example of program boilerplate, but it's very helpful to just have maybe a couple different documents that you can pull from very easily. So what I would start with is developing general operating boilerplate. So this is and we'll include this at the very end of the series with a list of resources that we offer. But your general operating boilerplate, this is, who you are as an organization. So your history, your mission, talking your entire story, talking about your audience. It may be a summation of programs and demographics for your board, your staff, your volunteers, and your audience. So this is really great language to have and to update as needed, that you can, if you're just submitting a general operating application, you can just pull from that pretty easily. But you want to make sure that this is very impactful language and you update it as needed. But these are things that you can put onto your website or pull from your website. Use it in annual reports. It's just very helpful to have this basic boilerplate that you can go back to again and again. You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel with every single grant application that you do, but having strong foundations is going to help you so much in the long run. Now, for individual programs or departments, you may have program boilerplate. So this slide shows it here of having a program overview, descriptions, what your program is accomplishing, their statement of need, and then thinking very strongly about how are you evaluating the program's impact. Again, knowing who your audience and constituency is, and also how are you marketing the work that you're doing. So I will tell you my background. I was in programming previously, and I worked with a development department of one who she was trying to fundraise for so many different departments, not just mine. Now that I think about it, if I had created this program boilerplate when I started a new program or a new project, if I just created this and given this to my development officer, it would have made her job so much easier. So just think about this, that if you have very strong programs, this is a great way to involve the different staff that you're working with. And it makes it a lot easier when you know what's going on, that you can easily apply for grants using this language straight from the person who's developing it. All right. And
Marcy, I'll interject here too, because what you just said is like spot on, because often, especially for new organizations or folks who are new to grants, they don't really, there's the boilerplate helps because you open up the grant application and it's often, it's typically a lot of the same information you see over and over again. The boilerplate's nice because you can start to fill things in and not feel like you're completely overwhelmed. But it also is really useful for program staff because it kind of gives them an idea of how to think about projects. Like, how are they gonna, what do they need to think about to make it, something that could be transferred into a proposal easily. So it's a really valuable tool for folks across the organization. And it does also help to keep you consistent. You're not rewriting things or getting dates wrong or things like that. It's all in there. So I feel like having good boilerplate is really helpful, across functionally.
Absolutely, Andrew. Thank you so much for amplifying that. We cannot say it enough. Good boilerplate will help you in the long run. So this is definitely somewhere we think that you should spend your time. But it's a great way again to involve other staff members that you work with. All right, let's scoot on to the next slide. All right, so this brings us to the end of our presentation today, getting to know grants, but we will stay on for a Q&A if we have any comments or questions. We hope you'll join us the rest of the month of August. So every Thursday in August, we are doing one of these webinar series, and next week, it will be project planning and prospecting. So if you are just thinking, I have a great program, I don't know where to look, this is going to be a great session for you to attend. On August 22nd, we will be doing a deep dive into writing winning grant proposals. So talking about metrics and evaluations and how you're communicating your impact to potential funders. And then our last session on August 29th is the essentials of grant management. So how do you be a good steward, and how do you build these relationships with funders so that you can go back to them again and again? And we have 2 QR codes. I'm hoping that work because I think there was maybe an issue with the other one. But if you'd like to learn more about Purpose Possible or are interested in doing a consultation to figure out how we can best serve your needs, you can scan the top QR code, and our favorite person, Audie, is putting the links in the comments to this. And please also check out our 2023 annual report. So Hannah, Andrew, and I are just one of many Purpose Possible consultants who are doing great work to serve our clients. And we want to share all the cool things that they're doing. So please check out our amazing annual report to see all of this work.
Yeah, and as we go through this series, we're going to have different folks come, different consultants come in, and we all have a wide range of backgrounds and expertise. And I know Marcy and I have kind of, as we've been working on these together, have kind of learned things from the other consultants. So it won't just be us on each of these. So you'll get to meet some other folks with Purpose Possible.
Yeah, Andrew and I will be continuing on with this series, so you'll see these faces again, but we want to thank Hannah so much for being with us today. And Hannah wrote a great blog post that is on our website, a great overview of grants. You can check that out on our website, purposepossible.com, or we will be linking that out with many other resources at the very end of this series. Okay, do we have any comments or questions in the chat? Let's see. I don't know if I'm seeing any, but if you have any questions, these are our email addresses if you'd like to reach out. Again, if you're interested in learning about how Purpose Possible can work with you, please go to our website, purposepossible.com, and sign up to do a consultation and figure out how can Purpose Possible meet your needs. Okay. I think that's it. Oh, thank you so much. Great session. Wonderful. We appreciate the feedback. And we look forward to seeing you all in one of our later sessions this month. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.